This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca, and today I am speaking with Canadian author Alexis Stefanovich-Thomson. He writes a wide variety of crime and crime-adjacent fiction, including novels, novellas, stories, and flash fiction. He is the past winner of the Black Orchid Novella Award 2021 and the Crime Writers of Canada Best Novella Award 2023 for The Man Who Went Down Under. His first novel, The Road to Heaven, published by Dundurn Press in 2024, is a noir mystery introducing artless young detective Patrick Bird, set in Toronto's Parkdale and High Park during the tumultuous 60s. It was shortlisted for a Mystery Writers of America Edgar Award in the Best Paperback Original category and a Private Eye Writers of America Seamus Award in the Best First PI Novel category. Today we will be talking about the second book in the Patrick Bird mystery series, Opposite Sully's Gym, which will be released March 31st, 2026. And Alexis, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me here, Rebecca. It's great to be here.
Well, I will say to everyone, many if you've listened to the podcast, people have already heard me talk about this, how much I love this series. But I came across The Road to Heaven on Instagram in August of last year, and I got it from my public library, read it, loved it, wrote a little thing about it on Instagram saying how much I love this character and I can't wait to hopefully see another book in the future. And then you responded and said one's coming out in the spring of 26. So really, really thrilled that I came across and didn't have to wait too long. But for those who have yet to read your novel, can you tell us a bit about it? And I understand, especially with mysteries, it's hard because of spoilers. But then also, how did you decide to write about James Earl Ray's connection to Toronto, which really blew my mind and I learned a lot of things I didn't know?
Yeah, so Opposite Sully's Gym is the second book in the series, as you said, and it's a mystery, it's a thriller, and it's also a historical novel. So it takes place centered around a rooming house on Ossington Avenue here in Toronto, and that's a street that's it's a fair size. It's got a subway stop there, but that street in the 60s was full of rooming houses up and down the street, and those rooming houses. People who lived in them were working class people, newcomers to Canada. And so in the rooming house at the center of this story, some of the roommates, the people who live there's Danny, he drives a taxi. Often he's working night shifts. There's Shirley, she's a nurse and she's a recent immigrant from Jamaica. There's Mr. Yusuf, he's a medical student from Pakistan. And so this rooming house is owned by Patrick Bird's mother-in-law. So our young artless detective is a little less artless. He's got married now. His wife Rose is expecting their first child, and his mother-in-law is always asking him to help out with the tenants. And the book begins. He's been asked to investigate because there's a tenant who hasn't paid the rent in 3 weeks. And he goes down, he looks around, the rooms have been trashed, everything's upside down, and before he can leave the house, the police have arrived, and the tenant's been found dead at the local, on the grounds of the Canadian National Exhibition under one of the roller coasters. And as he gets deeper and deeper into the story, he finds out that of just a little earlier, there was another tenant in this house who'd left, and that tenant was James Earl Ray. And it's not a well known story in history, but immediately following the assassination of Martin Luther King, James Earl Ray traveled north through America. He took a taxi from Detroit across the bridge to Canada, to Windsor. And then he made his way to Toronto and he stayed in this rooming house at 102 Ossington Avenue for about 6 weeks. And while he was in Canada, his main purpose was to get a passport under an alias. And he was successful in doing that. And he left Toronto. He flew out of Toronto to Heathrow, London Airport, and lived in London for a short period of time before he was eventually arrested there and brought back to the States and charged in the assassination of Martin Luther King. So James Earl Ray is only a minor peripheral character in this story, but that the rooming house where he was, and the fact that he was there, and the fact that he was in Toronto, Canada, is central to the story. So it's a piece of Toronto history that I've known about for quite some time now, and once I had The Road to Heaven published and I was looking what could I write about next, it was certainly something that I was really interested in writing about. One of the things I hope to do with this series, and again, it's hope is hope isn't a plan, but it's what I've got right now, is to write a bit of a social history of Toronto through a mystery series. And I look at someone like Michael Conley or Ian Rankin and what they've done for Los Angeles or Edinburgh. And if I was able to do something like that for Toronto, I would be so happy. Not that I'm either of those people, but imitation is the highest form of flattery. So, that's one of the things I'm aiming at. And really, this story and Toronto in 1968 is interesting to me. That Toronto was originally a very white, very Protestant city, and in the 50s and 60s, it really changed, and now it's one of the most diverse cities in the world, if not the most diverse city in the world. And so I'm really looking at the early stages of that immigration to Toronto. And I'm also looking in this book, I think, at US Canada relations and the relationship between those two countries. And that seems topical in 2026. And I think it was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father, who said in 1971 that living next to America was a bit like being in the same bed as an elephant, that you knew when it rolled over. So things that happen in America affect us here in Canada, even when we're not thinking about it. And so certainly I'm exploring that, and both how Americans and Canadians are different, but also how we're similar. And so those are some of the things I'm hoping to try and get through. But I will say it's first and foremost, I think, a mystery and a thriller and a page turner. So
Yeah, and the second one, the first one was really interesting because it was set over like a 48-hour time period. So that one was really fascinating because it's not a, it's not a really short book, but it's 48 hours. So it was a really intense 48 hours as you're following everything. Do you want to talk about that one just a little bit at all?
sure. So the Road to Heaven, the first book, takes place in 1965 in Toronto, in Parkdale, which is the neighborhood that I live in, and it's about the missing teenage girl and young detective's sort of first case on his own to go out and find this missing girl. And in looking for her, he's led back in time over 13 years to a bank robbery that went horribly wrong 13 years earlier, and he starts finding out all sorts of family secrets, and it comes to an explosive end. Spoiler alert, I won't say anything.
Good.
But as you said, it takes place, it's very constricted time. It all takes place in 48 hours. And I think, one of my models in thinking about time like that was Ross MacDonald in the Lou Archer novels of the 50s and 60s and early 70s are really, he does a great, really does a great job of pacing his books, and I really aim for that. And in The Road to Heaven, there's really almost no time. Even when Patrick Bird goes to sleep, he sort of, you go to sleep with him 1 minute, and the next chapter the alarm bell's going off and he's waking up. So there's almost no time that's missing in the entire novel, and that gives it, I think, a level of narrative energy sort of to run through. The next book, Opposite Sully's Gym, I wasn't able to write the exact same way because I was tied to historical dates, and so there are a number of dates that are markers, and I was faithful, very faithful to the time. I had a calendar I was working with, and so, but there are a number of dates that are set in history that I wanted to be truthful and faithful to.
Yeah. One of the things I want to mention too, in Sully's Gym, opposite Sully's Gym, there's this real cat and mouse feature to it that I have to say I was on the edge of my seat, and I'm not. Again, we're not doing any spoilers, so I'm just gonna just say that there was a moment that kind of took my breath away, and I felt the tension of it, and I was really freaked out. And what I love too is it's not like graphic uh, description of bad things and body horror and that kind of thing. But I just want to say, oh my God, you had me on the edge of my seat in this one section, and I just want to let everybody know that was God. That was probably my favorite part of the book, to be honest with you. Uh, the one thing, or I should say, the other thing I want to mention is I loved how, and again, no spoilers, but this story is would be completely believable outside of James Earl Ray. I mean, as you say, James Earl Ray goes off, but the way you weave this story, it was completely believable that it could have happened exactly the way you wrote it. And I know that's kind of ambiguous, but I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it just felt like it could have happened exactly the way you wrote it.
So, I mean, just a few things about that. And I certainly, I think the story as it's written is possible. I don't, and it's even approaching, I don't know that it's approaching, but it could be probable. There's nothing, there are very few things that I know that I contradict. I know historically that I contradict in my book. The dates are all correct. Uh, you know, the landlady at the rooming house, in my book, she's Italian because Rosie from the first book is Italian. In real life, she was Polish. She has a name; people know who she was. But there is remarkably little written about James Earl Ray's time in Toronto, and there is a bit of a mystery surrounding it. And not to give too much away, I will say that there's one character in the book called Raoul who's sort of one of the handler of James Earl Ray and connected back, and he is again. Uh, I'm not inventing him as a character. He's fictional in my book, but if he's in Wikipedia, if you look, he's the James Earl Ray has mentioned him several times and described him and said that he was the person who supplied the gun and convinced him, and that they so all of that is again, it's hard to say whether it's true or not, but it's not something that's made up independently by me. Uh, and then the third thing I'd say is there's always been a question about was there a Canadian connection
Mhm.
to James Earl Ray? Were there people, a person or people in Toronto who was helping him? And there's never been a definitive answer on that, but there are several facts, several of them which are not in the book, which point to the idea that there was a Canadian connection. There was someone in Canada who was helping James Earl Ray, and that has never been fully investigated to my mind. And it's not. I'm a fiction writer, so it's not something I want. I'm curious, but it's not a task I want to take on. But
Right, right. Well, it's funny because I talked to a couple of my friends. So I'm from the US. I'm in Michigan, but I talked to a couple of my friends and I said, "Did you know this connection to Canada with James Earl Ray?" And we didn't know it. And it's funny because one of my friends, she's in her 80s and so she remembers, when it happened because I was a kid when it happened. And she said she didn't even realize it. She said cuz it's kind of weird. I just sort of thought like, "Oh, well, they caught him right away." So I had no idea that his whole, trajectory. I had no idea about that. But I do want to talk about Patrick Bird because I love a flawed character. I absolutely it's one of my favorite things in literature and he is perfectly flawed. No matter how many times you think he might get it right, he somehow shoots himself in the foot. I don't know how he does it, but can you describe Patrick Bird and how he came to be? How did you determine that this was what your character was going to be? And do you anticipate a time when he might mature and not make boneheaded mistakes?
well, first off, let me just say that phrase "perfectly flawed" is great. I want to steal it. I must say. So,
Okay.
and certainly, I hope I can use it when I'm talking about him in the future. So, thank you for that.
Great.
Uh, Another thing I'd say is, I think like we're all flawed as people, so there's a level of realism. I think there is some writing and some writers who want to write about the world the way it should be, or a perfect world, and I think there is a place for that, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to write something a little more realistic. I think the characters, you know I'm trying to push the boundary, I think, a little bit of like how unlikable or flawed a character can be and still have the reader root for them. And I think there may be some people who find Patrick Bird too much and don't want to root for him. But you know, I'll also tell a story that I was in a writing group and we read a book. It's a famous book that it was originally about for screenwriting, and now there's one for novel writing called Saves the Cat, and it talks about uh, you know, that all characters have to have a flaw, and then at the end of the book, there's gonna be learning, and the flaw is gonna be resolved, and your character's flaw is gonna make them unlikable. So what you need to do in the first chapter is they need to save a cat, and then everyone will like them. And I just have to say, like, I was so disgusted by all of this. So that's not how I want to write or how I want to think about my characters. And maybe I'm wrong, and thousands of Hollywood blockbusters have proven me wrong. But I feel like that's not how you should think about characters. I feel like I'd much rather have my characters be organic, and that the choices they're making are their choices and not my choices. Stephen King talks about writing and says that writing is like being an archaeologist and uncovering, something underground that exists there, and you're just finding it. And I feel, I thought that was a brilliant description of writing, and I feel like that's more my process. I'm not like, oh, let me find a cat to save here. Um, so I think, to a certain extent, like I don't have a lot of explanations about where Patrick Bird came from or who he was. I think I could say, that idea of failing and succeeding at the same time is an idea that appeals to me a great deal. Uh, you talked about when you introduced me, you had so many kind words, but you talked about my novella, The Man Who Went Down Under, and that was just to a small part based on a biographical story about Dashiell Hammett when he was a Pinkerton agent. He was working in San Francisco, and he always wanted to go to Australia. It was a dream of his, and he was told to investigate a boat because they knew there was stolen gold on the boat. And he was told to find the gold, and he went on the boat and he looked all over and he didn't find the gold. And he went back and they said, you're going to have to sail to Australia with this boat because we know the gold is there and you're going to find it when they're unloading the boat. And he said, okay. And they said, we just want you to go back one more time and take a look for the gold. And so he went back, one more time the night before it was to sail, and he looked everywhere and he found the gold. And then he quit Pinkerton. He said he was too stupid to be a detective. So that kind of it very appeals to me. It's sort of that succeeding and failing at the same time. So for whatever reason, it's kind of an idea that I like. So the other thing I say a few other things about Patrick Bird and his characters is one is that he I think clearly he's coming from a tradition of private eyes, whether that's Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe or Lou Archer, but and so I think he's similar to some of them, and he's different as well. And one of the main differences is that he's younger. And so, in being younger, it does mean he has less experience, he has less knowledge, he is less cynical, I think. Perhaps he's a little more vulnerable, but I would also say he's kind of, in some senses, maybe he's innocent, but he's also I also often think about characteristics in terms of that there's often both a positive and a negative way to say things. That someone could be arrogant or they could be confident. They could be, so you could be innocent or you could just be ignorant, and they're both
Yeah.
states of not knowing. And sometimes we say old enough to know better, so sometimes I think we are feel like he really should know better, but somehow he doesn't. And other times perhaps we give him a pass and say, well, he just didn't know. So I think about him like that as well. And he does have that self-destructive nature, which I think is very hard to deal with. And I think, well, I know people in my life, whether they're friends or family, who have that ability to turn anything positive just to make a mess of it, and it's absolutely maddening. It's I don't really want them over at my house, but there is a certain interesting you know side to that. I also want to thank you for the idea of like, is there ever going to be a time when he doesn't screw up, that question? Because I would say I'd never thought of that, but I think that's a great idea. Like I'm always looking at, you know, what could we do to surprise the reader? Not to save a cat, but what could we do to surprise? What could we do that's different? And so that is an idea that I'd never thought of. Like, what if we did something straight ahead where he really was the hero? So that would.
Well, I will say that one of the things I like is that he is young. So when you realize in the first book that he is actually pretty darn young, I like that because usually our detectives are older. They have there's almost world weary in many ways, right? And I love that he comes in because he is well meaning. It's just that he is inexperienced or he has that temper and everything. And so I feel like he could mature, but he also he could just be who he is and continue to be that person, right? And so I hope that you keep the readers on our toes and we won't know which way he's going to go, but I absolutely love him because he did make me really frustrated in different times. Oh, I tell you, in the second book, my gosh. But anyway, but I loved it. As a reader, it kept me engaged. It kept me on my toes. I didn't know which way it was going to go. And that's absolutely what we want in a good thriller, mystery, and historical fiction because it was really, really fascinating. And I did the deep dive and started looking up all the stuff about James Earl Ray because I didn't know. So that was that. It was just a fun experience all the way around reading this book.
And one other thing I'd say
Yeah.
there is, again, both about Patrick Bird and about people in general, is like people do change and people can change, but people also always sort of are always the same as well. So
Exactly. I'm older and I've tried for years and I just finally went, screw it. I'm just who I am, right? Okay. Now, you write about Toronto in the 60s, and I wondered what your research process is for ensuring authenticity, or is it critical in getting it right? Because I sometimes wonder if there's that balance if you're going to write historical in a period of time that's not that far back. Like, how do you, because what I love is there are no cell phones and people are taking cabs. Like, those were two of my things, which it just made me feel like I love that this character is having to depend on a cab and can't just call somebody or text them right away and say, this is what's going on right now, that it's real time the way it used to be in the old days, right?
yeah, and so I mean, it's not the main reason I do it, but certainly I do feel like cell phones and computers have ruined a lot of fiction and a lot of movies, and that so setting something further back is gives me that advantage. But I mean, I also talked about writing a social history of Toronto and sort of having a runway through time is something I was always interested in. Also, I feel like writing about the past, that we're writing, when you write about the past, you're also writing about the present, that there's always going to be a comparison. And, we're going to be looking at the past and say, oh, wow, things were different then. Or you may look at the past and say, oh my God, nothing has changed, So I think there's always going to be that comparison. And I think inviting that comparison is good. So I do some research, and I do some of the things I do for research. I certainly do site visits because I live here in Toronto, and most of the places I write about are relatively close by. Like I rode by Ossington Avenue on my way to work and my way home today, so like
Oh,
it's
nice.
it's not far from me. And the house 102 Ossington is still there. It's not a rooming house anymore. That stretch of Ossington, actually, where it used to be Sully's boxing gym and all rooming houses, is now all high-end restaurants that my wife says we're too old to go to. That it's just for young people. So it's really a trendy neighborhood now. So I do site visits. I do a lot of work with Google Image. Like I just like looking at places to get a feel and looking at what they look like, looking at car styles and fashion. So I do that. I moved to Toronto with my family when in 1969, and but I was too young to remember anything then. But I certainly remember Toronto from the 70s, which is not so different. I also use Wikipedia a fair amount, and I find Wikipedia pretty good in that it gives me the right amount of information. Like I don't actually want to know everything, because I think that might be constricting. Like sometimes, I've talked a little bit about an adherence to the truth, but I also want a little flexibility in being able to write fiction. This is a work of fiction, and sometimes you can get bogged down in getting everything exactly right. The first book, certainly I was freer, but the second book I was dealing with with a number of real life people and events, and so I certainly did more research. I did read, uh, it wasn't a joy, but I read some of James Earl Ray's biography to look at what he had to say about his time in Canada. Both he was in Canada in 1967, and then later in 1960, then the next year in 1968 after the assassination. But again, he'd been here the year before, so there was a question again about whether there were contacts here at that time. So yeah, I do some research, but I also don't get bogged down in research.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I mentioned it and then you mentioned it, the novella that you wrote, The Man Who Went Down Under. How can we access that? Is that available somewhere?
So that's published by Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazines. So I don't know if libraries in the States carry it. That
I think so.
Yeah. So it's I don't have the um uh the
That's
exact
okay because
volume off the top of my head, but
I'm a retired library director. I'll figure it
okay.
out. So, but that's good
Okay.
to know. It's
Yeah.
good to know where it's at. I
Yeah.
should be able to get it. If I can't do it, I can get it through interlibrary loan probably. So
Yeah.
I'll double check that because I want to read that as well. Now, did you know? Oh, I know what I was going to ask you. There was another thing I wanted to ask about process a little bit in the sense of when you wrote both of these books, did you know the begin? I mean, did you know the ending before the beginning? Like, how do you write? Is it sort of sequential or are you kind of
Yeah.
knowing how it's going to end, I guess?
So I write from the beginning through to the end of the book. Uh, so I start at chapter one and go all the way through. I write every day when things are going good. I try and have a quota of 1,000 words a day. So you can write 80,000 words in 3 months. So I wrote The Road to Heaven like that. That was during the height of the pandemic when everything was shut down, when there was no socializing, when there weren't any other demands. I was working, but there weren't the other demands. And so I did write that quickly, and then there were obviously a lot of revisions. But the other thing I don't have a plan of where it's going to end, but I don't believe you can sit down with a blank page and have no idea what you're going to write. So often I'm maybe two or three chapters ahead in my head and thinking of things. And so we're moving like that. So yeah, I mean, I think I could say in both cases I wasn't exactly sure how it was going to end in either of them, and as sort of as Stephen King we talked about earlier, sort of uncovering it as you go. Um, I'm a believer, like I like to write every day, and I also my dream would be to have about an hour to think about writing every day. And
Ooh,
right
yeah,
now right, this week I'm having neither of them, but so like having time to think about writing is really helpful. And again, during the pandemic, I was just going for a walk every day and thinking about things and thinking about what might happen next, and that worked out perfectly. And again, now I'm a little busier in life, and I'm working out other things and maybe just moving a little slower. But I do like having that momentum where you're going day after day after day, because you're not forgetting what's going on or anything like that. So that would be my ideal, but I'm not quite there right now. So
yeah. Now, did you know when you started the series or when you wrote the first book, did you know it was going to be a series? And is there a commitment for more books in the series? I'm really, really hoping that there's a commitment somewhere there.
when I started writing The Road to Heaven, I think I was an unpublished author. I'd never had anything published, so I wasn't thinking like, let's make a long series. I was thinking about finishing the book and then trying to get it published. And actually, when I finished it and started investigating trying to get it published, I was like, no one is gonna look at this if you have no writing credits to your name. And so then I started trying to write shorter pieces and started get trying to get them published. And again, I got so lucky I won the Black Orchid Novella Award, and then I placed third in a Toronto Star short story contest, which is
Ooh.
one of the biggest short story contests in Canada, either the biggest or the second biggest. And so that was really big. And so then, I was at a reading, and I did a reading, and afterwards I was approached by Megan Beadle, who was working at that time as an acquiring editor at Dundurn, and she said, if you have a novel, ever to send me, please feel free. Here's my contact information. And I was like, well, I have one in the drawer. So it worked out really perfectly for me. But I did it a little backwards, maybe, in starting with the novel and then going to the shorter stuff. But once it was published, I think it's natural to think in mysteries, particularly detective fiction, that it's going to be a series. And so I was thinking immediately about second book, and I can tell I have a third book that's complete, and it's with the publisher, so I'm very hopeful for that. I haven't heard back from them, but there's a third in the series. I have ideas for a fourth and fifth, so I mean, I see this going forward, and I see also sort of an arc for Patrick Bird as a character as well. So, but
Oh,
you've
excellent.
given me new ideas about him doing something successful. So maybe that'll change.
Okay, I'm really excited to hear that you are making your way. You've got the next one and then plans for the other ones. I'm really excited about that. And I'm just curious, and you don't have to be specific, but have you do you already have sort of, well, I mean, the third book is done. So, like, are you picking things in Toronto's history to kind of emphasize like you did with this one? Or are you being more open to what could possibly, do you, in other words, do you have like a list going like, I want to touch base on these subjects or happenings, or is it more kind of flexible at this stage?
I think it's more flexible, and there. I mean, I have thought about different things that happened in Toronto. In the '70s, for example, the CN Tower was built in I don't know exactly 76 maybe. So different things, but I also don't want Patrick Bird to become kind of the Forrest Gump of Toronto. So um, I think I'm working from a slightly different angle, and I'm looking at. Not so much events that happen in Toronto, but one thing I will say is I don't ever want to write the same book twice. So I think the first book and the second book you can see how they're different.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you the third book is different again in that it's Patrick Bird and his wife and his children are invited to a friend's cottage. So it's a cottage weekend where something goes horribly wrong. And again, I don't know about I imagine it's fairly similar in Michigan, but in Toronto, not me, but a lot of people do
Yeah.
have cottages, and
Yeah.
there's a huge expanse of cottage country north of the city, and millions of beautiful lakes, and so
Yeah.
it's it takes place out of the city,
Oh.
so it's a little different in that sense.
Okay. I love that. I love that there will be differences between the stories and that it doesn't become, because as you know, some mystery series are just very, very similar. And you've read kind of one, you've read them all. So I love what you're doing with this character and the subjects and everything. I love that. So I assume, just by based on some of the things you've already said, I know that you grew up reading classic noir mysteries, and I wondered if there are any recommendations, classic or current titles you'd like to share with our listeners.
So many
Good. We love it.
it's so many a lot of classics. So I will say, I'm a huge Raymond Chandler fan, and recently I reread The Lady in the Lake, and it held up, I thought, really, really well. And I don't know that I don't think it's one that people think about often when they think Raymond Chandler, but I thought The Lady in the Lake was great. I'm a big James M. Cain fan. Double Indemnity is one of my favorite books, and I really feel like his the economy he can write with, it's almost like poetry. They're just so few words. The books are so short, and at the end of Double Indemnity is just sends a chill through you when you read it. It's a great book. Ross MacDonald, I mentioned already talking today, and he, I think, is a great writer, and he's someone who really I think got better as a writer as he went along in his career, which is not always the case. And so my favorite book of his is The Chill.
Hmm.
Um, getting more current, although not alive, but Elmore Leonard. I love the early Elmore Leonard. So I guess you're in Michigan, so some of the Detroit books, City Primeval, Unknown Man, Number 52, and then this one's in Florida, La Brava, I think. But all his books are great. Someone who again is doing something different in mystery writing that's really impressive is James Ellroy. He is not to everybody's taste, I know. Someone described reading him like it's like you're just being punched in the face repeatedly, which is not everybody's idea of a good time.
Okay.
So the Cold 6000 was the book of his I thought was best, but he's someone who's really elevated the mystery novel to somewhere else. Like I think um, now I'm going to lose the name, but anyway, I think he's great. Michael Connelly, I mentioned earlier, the Harry Bosch novels. Harry Bosch, another great flawed character, I think that is really successful, and also just what he's been able to do with sort of the history of Los Angeles and the way he really in the background, but has it going all through all of his stories is great. I mentioned I also like books like Richard Osman and the Tuesday Night Murder Club books. I thought were very, very well done. And then one perhaps lesser known book is Don Carpenter's Hard Rain Falling, which is kind of I wrote down here, On the Road meets The Executioner's Song, and that's from the '60s, and it's a great, it's not a mystery, but it's a great crime novel from the '60s. Re-released by a New York Review of Books, so it's nice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So,
Wow.
so
Well, is that it?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That was enough.
No, I mean, I love it because now I've got some things because I've read James McCain before, or M. Cain, and I've also read Ray Chandler and stuff. I've read a few of those, but it's been a really, really long time. So I kind of do. I think I'm going to go back and revisit Lady in the Lake and Double Indemnity. So yeah, I think that's really kind of fun. So Alexis, thank you so much for coming on and chatting about your new book, Opposite Sully's Gym. I'm really recommending everybody jump on the bandwagon now because this is a brand new series. You can be in on it early and then wait patiently for the next books to come out. But thank you so much, and I hope that when the third one comes out, you'll come back and have a chat with us again.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for, giving me the time to talk about my writing with you tonight. It's been great.
Thank you so much, and happy reading, everybody.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style, and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.